is your Classic Metal Show right here on the ClassicMetalShow.com. That was the Rods, of course. The name of that tune is Party All Night. That is from the Brotherhood of Metal. And one of the members of the Brotherhood of Metal, a long time member of it, as well as the drummer of the Rods, is, of course, drummer Carl Canedy. Carl, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent, man. It's definitely good to talk to you. It's been a while, man. It's been, 8 years since we last had Vengeance.
Yep, and thank you for the support. We appreciate it.
Sure. Well, let's start there before we get into Brotherhood of Metal, Carl. I guess the obvious question is where you guys been? This is it's been a long break from between Vengeance and now Brotherhood.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've done a solo album. David has done 2 solo albums. I've done some producing. We've been busy, but we didn't have a record deal. So we just did our own little solo albums, and for whatever they were worth. And now, once we got signed to Steamhammer, I was like, okay, let's get back to the Rods.
Sure. Now talk a little bit about the Steamhammer deal. I mean, it's got to be refreshing for a band that has, a long history like you guys do to get a call and to get a deal with a label, especially in a time when, label deals are very, very, very hard to come by.
They are. And, we've wanted to work with Ollie, our A&R rep at Steamhammer, for a long time. And we tried 2 times previously unsuccessfully. And this time it was able to make it work. And so we're excited. And, I think we did a good record and we're happy about it. And I think that the label is pleased. And so far, so good. Very happy to be working with the Steamhammer SPV.
Sure. Well, Carl, let's talk about Brotherhood of Metal. Anybody that hears it will know instantly that it's the Rods. The one thing that I like probably the best about it actually doesn't really relate to the music at all, but the production level on this record is amazing. This is, I would say, by far the best sounding Rods record I think I've ever heard. Yeah,
thanks, Chris. I think the reason I think we'll credit that with Chris Collier, who did the mix.
Okay.
I had wanted to. We've all talked about the fact that we've been unhappy with mixes, and I just think that sometimes engineers either didn't get it or they weren't whatever. They didn't get the band, but Chris Collier got the band, and I had heard Last in Line, and I heard it jump out of my speakers.
Sure.
And I thought, wow, that's freaking great. So I started hunting him down. And I found him. I had a conversation with him. Then we all talked, and he did a killer job. And I think that's what you're hearing. I think we've always turned in tracks like this, but they haven't sounded like this.
Sure.
So Chris Collier is really the reason. And thank you for the compliment, because I do think it's one of our better albums.
Sure. And listening to it, I mean, it definitely covers the themes that you guys are known for. It's definitely metal, and it's all about being metal, and, and at the same time, it doesn't feel old, I guess, which is just a standard feel that you get a lot of times for an older band that's, still trudging on today. A lot of times they record music that just sounds like rehashed work from their past. And I would say this very much does not sound like that from you guys.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I think we try to stay on top of what we do. I think we're playing better than ever. I think our songwriting is growing still. And, so we're all pretty happy about it. We're already working on material for the new album.
Oh, great. Well, talk a little bit about the recording, Carl, because I have to imagine that, especially compared to, the early to mid 80s when you guys were, at your peak, this is a totally different animal to record and write music than it used to be, no?
It is totally different. In the old days, we were all together all the time. We were playing dates constantly. We lived close to each other. That's not the case anymore. Gary and David live fairly close, but they're still 35 miles apart, and which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a distance when you have a busy day and whatever getting together. So, and I live an hour and 15 minutes away from this guy, so we get together and we rehearse, but it's not like we used to every day, and so the songwriting is different, and so like in the case of Brotherhood of Metal, I had the idea for the song and the lyrics, and I sent them to David, and part of the theme, and then David, worked on the lyrics as well and came up with the music. And I record my drums at home now, which is something I never did before. So everything I do is recorded here, and that's a big difference for me. And so David will come here and he'll lay a click track. We'll figure out the tempo. We'll work on the songs. And then I'll do my drum tracks, send them on to them, and then they record. So it's a totally different world from when we used to record live.
Sure. And yet the interesting thing is it doesn't sound at all pieced together. In fact, most of the songs on here sound very, very tight and very much anthemic in a way that would, I can picture it in my mind with you guys being on stage at, I don't know, Wacken or somewhere, and, getting the crowd involved with you. I mean, really, really, connecting between yourselves and the crowd.
Well, I'm excited to play these songs live, and I do agree. I do think they are anthemic, and I think that they have I think they're going to be great to play live. I'm excited to see how the crowd reacts to these songs.
Sure. Now, Carl, for you, what songs do you feel are the best or the strongest on Brotherhood of Metal? Because there's a lot to choose from.
Despite the fact that it's a solid record, that's a lot of continuity in it. There's some diverse tracks. Like you said, "Party All Night." That song was a song that David wrote, and the drum track. David and Gary both started as drummers.
Sure.
So they, they're both very good drummers. So David had that idea, and everything I played on that is beat for beat what he dictated to me, what he asked me to play. I didn't add one thing of mine other than just play it the way I play it. Okay. But everything was his. So, that song is really different from everything else on the album. It was the oddball song, but it was a cool song to add. So I don't know to say. I think 1982, the song that I wrote, I really wanted to chronicle the band, the retrospective of the band, and I thought that was a successful attempt. It doesn't always work that way when you start to write a song. Sometimes when you're writing a song, you think it's going to be a great song, and you get done with it and listen to it, God, what a piece of shit that is. So at least in this case, my vision initially was realized fairly close to what I had hoped for.
Sure.
I love Everybody's Rockin'. I love Evil in Me. And it's the last song on the album, but I'm wondering if we should have moved it up somewhere, because that's such a great track for me. I love playing it, and I love the song. But Brotherhood of Metal for me is like our stairway to heaven. Okay. It's it's probably one of the best songs, and represents, I think, the band musically and lyrically of any of the songs we've done. If there had to be one song that kind of summed up the band, that would be it.
Sure. And it's the kind of song that I could see Rod's fans taking as kind of like the theme of being a fan of the band, because it really does kind of highlight that, we're all together. It's one brotherhood, type of a vibe.
Right. And that's how I came up with it initially. When we first started again, I really was worried about, hey, there's so many great young drummers, and they just play so fast. They have such great techniques, and it's a different style than I play. And I was really concerned about it. And my friend said, you have a great style of your own. Like, why would you worry about that? Just play what you play. And, and so I made peace with it. But then when we toured, I saw that, wow, these drummers are phenomenal. But then they would come to me and say, man, I love what you're playing. And, you have such a different style. And it was like a clinic watching you, and it was such a real camaraderie within the drummers of all genres of metal. And it was the same with the other musicians in the band. All the musicians supported all the other bands. And I think this became very obvious to me when we were headlining at Muscle Rock in Sweden, and right before us was a surprise guest. Well, it was The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. And it had really little to do with metal, but the fans embraced the music because he was genuine, and he was excellent. And it just pointed out to me that was the Brotherhood. If those were metal fans, and they weren't being snobby about, oh, this isn't metalcore, this isn't death metal, this isn't everybody was just like, hey, we're here and it's metal
Sure.
and we love it all.
No
So
doubt.
that's kind of what I got the whole idea of. It's just within the band, the three of us have been together almost 40 years, which is unbelievable.
Sure.
And uh, and then of course the fact that there's a strong alliance and camaraderie within the metal community.
No question. Now, Carl, you mentioned about drummers and different, how fast people can play, and certainly, in addition to being fast, the level of technical ability is off the charts compared to the old days. But I will say, and you can, I'm sure you probably agree with this, but I'm curious if you do. No matter how fast anybody can play, no matter how precise they can play, whether it's the guys from Meshuggah or I don't know, Divine Heresy, or pick a band, it doesn't matter.
Right.
There's a lot to be said in the world of drumming and in the back end of music for just that specific swing that a drummer brings. And you don't have to be fast. You don't even have to be technically great to be a fantastic drummer. If you bring that swing to a song or to a band,
I
go ahead.
totally agree. I totally agree, and it's true because it always comes down to what does the drummer bring to the song.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line has always been any band or any piece of music that's going to last, it's about the song. So it's about how you approach the song and how you perform that song. And there's some. I mean, I love so many drummers out there, and sometimes I'm listening to stuff that's really fast and it's triggered, and I'm thinking, realistically, that was probably programmed because it just would be so difficult to get it so clean and so precise. But that being said, the drummers can play it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that when the time comes to record, sometimes it's so triggered, and you just wonder if it's not just electronic drums or triggered. But I do think that when you listen to someone like John Bonham or Ringo, when they play, the swing feel they have, it's just such a groove that you can't buy that. You can put 100 drummers and they can't play like Ringo. It's taken me 50 years to play. I probably played like Ringo in the first 6 months of playing. And now, 50 years later, however long it's been, I can only approximate what Ringo does.
Sure.
So, and the same with, I can play John Bonham chops all day. He was a big influence on me. And I get really approached the feel, but it ain't John Bonham.
Right.
It never will be because he was the man. So it is true. It's how the drummers who are musical approach things.
Sure.
And I have respect for the drummers who play technically fast and great chops, but I also appreciate drummers who can, lay down a really solid groove and have tasteful musical fills.
Sure. Well, I mean, you look at a guy like Phil Rudd. I don't think anybody's going to claim Phil Rudd to be the greatest technical drummer of all time, but you can't touch him. And even when AC/DC tried not to have Phil Rudd in the band, it sounded different.
No, that's a really perfect example, Chris. And not only that, but I think next to Ringo, he's one of the wealthiest drummers. So there you go. Charlie Watts, Ringo, and Phil Rudd. What can you say? Between the three of them, nobody's like the technical genius.
Right. Exactly. Well, Carl, I'm curious for you. Brotherhood of Metal, it's one of those records that, you know how it is here in the States. In the States, it's gonna come and go. I mean, you're hopeful that people will gravitate to it, but realistically, the States just seems so much more fickle than the European market that definitely embraces this style of metal more. Why do you think it is that the European market is so much more, I guess, in tune or willing to gravitate to this style of music?
I think in America, and I think we have great metal fans here, so I'm not slagging the metal fans in America because we have some really dedicated hardcore fans, but the masses in general in America, we're really fed disposable music, and so it's very trendy. Everything is trendy. Europe, they seem to really embrace music for the music, mm-hmm. and they get it, and it's different. I think in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of blues and jazz artists who wound up going to Europe to make a living because their music was appreciated there,
Sure.
whereas here it was not so much. So I think in Europe they've had a more intellectual and a more dedicated approach to the music itself. They're not so concerned with the trend. If they like a band and they like the music, they're going to probably stick with that band, and they're probably liking them not because they have a certain look or they're a hot boy band, but they like them because they like the music. And in America, I think that from early on, and I was just talking about this with a friend last night about when we were younger, how we were just spoon-fed by the radio.
Mm-hmm.
What some programmers chose, that's what we got to listen to. Whereas now, you can just go seek out the music you love, and it's a different day for that.
Sure, but it's almost harder though now, because now that you can go and search it, you're almost not told where to look.
Well, I think that's, people ask me, young bands, like, well, what do we do? I'm like, now it's easy to get your music out
Mm-hmm.
and make it available. You don't bottleneck anymore like it was when the Rods started, where you had to go through an A&R person. Indie was really almost not even, it was suicide really, more so for a band, because you were never going to get the networking you needed. So you bottlenecked with an A&R and a record label, and that was all done by committee, who decided what, and
Mm-hmm.
and so it was a different day, whereas now you can just go put it out. Like if you walk into McDonald's, somebody there can probably give you a download card or hand you one of their albums, and they're working at McDonald's. Everybody has something. But it's also harder to rise above the noise. Like you said, how do you find it? How do you know about these bands? And that makes it a lot tougher. And there's so many outlets, and there's so many, it's just tough for a band to advertise in all the places that are possible. And print is going down.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times print magazines are not as popular as they were, so it's online, and it's expensive.
Sure.
So for a band to do an album is no longer that expensive. You can get some gear and pretty much record it at home, and then upload it, and there you go. But getting the word out is very hard and can be very expensive. So, I always tell bands, try to go viral, try to build it, do as crazy, as inexpensive a video as you can,
Mm-hmm.
and just keep building your fan base.
Yeah. It's funny because in my day life, in my real life, I do marketing and online marketing and media. And one of the things that I tell a lot of bands when they reach out to me is reach out to these content creators, these YouTubers that have, 3 million followers or whatever, and submit them your music. Tell them, whatever, play it for free, use it as a bumper, use it as an intro, because it is a way to get in.
That's a great idea.
It's a very different market. It's not like the old days where, you would hear it because, it's just funny when you just talk about it now, it just sounds funny when you talk about tape trading or indie zines or, all that stuff. You try to explain that to a kid and they're like, well, how did it get to your phone? They don't understand. They don't understand what we used to do when we were kids, throwing a tape into a package and mailing it to the other side of the country and waiting 6 weeks to hear back if they liked it or not.
That's so true. And there's so many facets now. There's so many ways to get music. And, when I was young, it was you listen to the radio, whichever was the top 40 radio station.
Sure.
And, I'd watch Ed Sullivan, and I'd get a glimpse of the band. And the band would be on for 2 minutes. I'd get a glimpse of the drummer for maybe 25 seconds, if that, of the whole time. And I'd have to glean whatever I could. What's the setup? How are they holding their sticks? How are they hitting? What kind of cymbals? How did they set up their toms and whatever? It was so tough to get any information, whereas now it's not. But I think it is a great idea to reach out to the people doing media content and who are doing well, and sure. Just go everywhere you can, because that's your only option now.
Exactly.
You have to be very creative to do it.
Mm-hmm.
When we first put out when we did Crank It Up, and we had the single, the 45 pressed, I mailed them to different stations. And I did them, it was on my little label, and I mailed them out. And I had to wait. And finally, I didn't hear anything. And I called the Rochester station one evening, and I said, did you get, I sent you a 45. Were you able to, did you get it? And did you have a chance to hear it? It sounds great on the air. Like, what? but that's how it was. You had no idea. Like
Right.
now, I email it to somebody. I expect if I don't hear something by tonight, I'm going, hey, this guy's dissing me.
Right. Yeah. It is definitely so different. Well, Carl, let me ask you one. It doesn't really have to do with the rods, but it is certainly a guy that you're associated with. Obviously, yesterday was the 9th anniversary of the passing of the great one himself, Ronnie James Dio. And I'm sure you are aware of the hologram tours that they're doing with Dio.
I
And
am. I'm well aware of it.
I I'm gonna give you my thought, and you can tell me I'm crazy or you agree or what have you. But I'm against them, and I'll tell you why. Not because I have a problem with people seeing the music or experiencing the music, but I personally feel like you tarnish the legend. And the reason I think that is because you don't, part of becoming a legend, part of becoming legendary is that you were able to accomplish so much in such a small window of time. And I honestly feel like having this hologram doesn't allow the legend to form. It keeps it to where the actual time and body of work almost doesn't matter. And it's annoying to me that Ronnie James Dio, the greatest singer that's ever been out there, is not allowed to elevate through his passing to that highest tier. And I'm curious, as somebody that knew him and as somebody that obviously respected him, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think, just the little I've knew Ronnie, and him singing "The Code," a song that I had written,
Mm-hmm.
was probably the greatest moment in my musical history, my musical career.
Sure.
But he was such a great guy, and I have no idea, and I can't imagine how he would feel about it. I'm ambivalent about it because if it's done well, it keeps the music alive. If it's a shoddy, the band members are great. It keeps the
Sure.
band members working, which I know Ronnie loved his band guys. They loved him. That was a very tight family. Bands talk about being a family, but these guys truly were so devoted to Ronnie, and he was devoted to them. So it keeps the music alive. It keeps those guys working. So it keeps the music out there. But I haven't seen. I'm going to go see the hologram. David and I are going to go see it.
Okay.
I do know a lot about the inner workings of it, and I'm hopeful that it's a great production. But I understand completely what you're saying, and I am ambivalent.
Sure.
And I'm just going to wait till I see how this works out. But
Sure.
I do have mixed feelings about it because I'm probably too close to the whole situation to really be objective totally.
Sure.
But I do feel that what you have to say is valid.
Sure.
Ronnie really was so phenomenal, and depending on how it's presented, it could be less than what he's worthy of.
Sure, it's funny because I feel not funny, but I feel bad almost saying it too because I have friends that are in the band. I'm friends with Craig. I'm friends with Ripper. I don't want to see those guys struggle, and I don't want to see them fail. But it's like, man, oh man, it's like let my hero be my hero.
Right, but musically, they are those guys.
Sure.
They're not. There's nothing second rate about them.
Absolutely.
I mean, we toured with the Disciples. There's nothing second rate about it. It's Ronnie's band, and Ripper and Oni. Those guys do a phenomenal job. But I mean, with the hologram, it will be Ronnie, and the band. So, but it'll be interesting to see. I mean, you hate to see it fail, but
right. I guess we'll all see once it kicks off next month. But Carl, once again, the new record is called Brotherhood of Metal. When is it out?
June 7th.
June 7th, and it'll be everywhere that you get music these days. So make sure you go and get that. And Carl, as a tradition on the show, we always let the artist pick a closing track from the new record. Maybe tell us a quick story about it. So, what would you like us to wrap this one up with?
Well, I think I'm going to select. I mean, have you played Brotherhood?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. Oh, okay. Well, I would say Brotherhood's great, or I would say 1982 because that's really the history of the band. So people discovering the band, it might be an interesting for them to take the journey and the retrospective of that. So either of those two songs, I'll bounce it back to you.
All right.
And you choose between Brotherhood and 1982.
All right. Then I'll bounce it back to both of us, and I'll say we'll play both. How's that?
It's even better. I love it when it's a win-win.
Exactly. Well, let's check it out right now. Here's a double shot of the Rods right here on your Classic Metal Show.